Welcome, welcome. Thank you everyone for attending our second Visionary CCL series. My name is Lou Mirando. I'm the executive, I am the chair of the Executive Advisory Council at Fordham University. It's a position that I volunteer for. My day job is the CEO of Streamline Realty Funding. And today I'm really privileged to be able to introduce a panel that is really a power panel. And the majority of these people, there's only one person I've only met for the first time, have been friends throughout my whole career. Just a little bit about the Real Estate Institute at Fordham. We started this about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's grown very quickly. It's become a real go-to place for education, for certificates, for master's degrees in real estate. We just started a master's in construction management. We have a great active alumni, and this is part of our VCCL series. And what this is, it's a 5-year campaign, and we wanted to do something different. So what we did was we're paying homage to the 250th birthday of the United States, which will take place July 4th, 2026. And that'll be the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country, of 4th of July. And what we're trying to use that is a forward 5-year look ahead, because our business is changing every day and society is changing every day. And we're trying to pick up cues, and from your collective experiences, we can help plan our next 5 years. And we believe the real estate industry has always been an uplifting force, particularly in communities throughout the country. And when people can actually get involved in real estate, no matter what sector of it, it helps uplift communities. And it's really nice to be involved with Fordham, who has that as a goal. So what we like to say is the real estate industry could help form a more perfect union, and we've tied it into the anniversary of our country. And I appreciate everybody coming. First of all, I'd like to introduce Ben Brown. He's with Brookfield Property Partners. He's the managing partner, head of the U.S. in acquisitions and dispositions. Brookfield is a monster. I believe the last time I looked, $211 billion of assets under management. You know, a real trendsetter, a real center of influence type company. When I asked Ben, would he do it, Ben didn't hesitate and felt it was a good cause. And I'm so happy to have Ben here. And he has such great cross experience in almost every major sector. It's really great to have him. Next person, Scott Lawler, founder, CEO of Waypoint Residential. I know Scott going back many years, just a good friend and really just a great guy. One of the most successful guys in terms of getting stuff done. He was formerly the founding partner of Broadway Partners. In a fairly short span, he acquired 28 million square feet of office space in almost every major 24/7 city, and then went on to found Waypoint, which is thriving. And he is a fully integrated company. He develops properties, very strategic, and he knows so much about residential, and I'm proud to call him a friend. Steve McCraney is another friend. He's the CEO and founder of McCraney Properties. He's developed 15 million square feet of logistics and distribution space. He was named top 20 development National Real Estate Investor magazine. He has multiple designations, CCIM, SIOR, but he's not only in a sector, he is thriving in a sector and he's propelling it forward. And I find what he knows is fascinating and is so interrelated to much what we're doing. On a personal note, Steve has actually climbed. He's a high altitude climber in his day. I guess when he has nothing to do, which is hardly ever, he's actually climbed 7 of the highest altitudes on the earth. And it's just the nature of Steve, his intensity and his goodness and his charitable contributions. And lastly, but not least, my good friend Simon, a true friend. Simon and I go way back. Simon was appointed president in 1995 of Ackman Ziff. He has turned Ackman Ziff into one of the real great advisory intermediary companies in the country. He's kept it independent. They have offices in New York, Miami, San Francisco, LA. He's a consummate pro. And again, I asked Simon, and Simon has many other university affiliations, but I appreciate his friendship because he didn't hesitate to say yes. So with that, Simon, I turn it over to you, and I hope our audience can enjoy and learn from what you guys know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lou. And Scott's also a 30-year friend, so this is fun for me to be here today. Our topic is what's next. Not an easy topic these days. It's been quite challenging to make assumptions and projections of what's next. I think it's the hardest time in my career I ever remember doing that. I'm reminded that in last February I was in Canada meeting with a bunch of investors, and I think if I met with 10 investors, 8 of them said they were buying multifamily in the Southeast and in the Southwest. A big trend we saw coming the last few years. So I thought I would start with that trend about geography, and maybe with you, Scott, this movement to the red states from the blue states, and Florida and Texas, and you've been investing in multifamily. Is this short term, long term, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not short term. I'm an example of it. I moved from Connecticut to Florida in 2014, and we study these demographic trends very carefully. There's maybe a bit of a feeling that it's sort of a short term burst, maybe driven by COVID, but the fact is, if you look at the last 30 years, okay, from 1990 through the decade we just finished, and you take the dozen largest MSAs from, say, North Carolina to Florida to Texas that most institutional people would consider our sort of investment playing field if we're looking at the larger MSAs around that part of the country. Look at population growth over a 30-year window, okay? Those MSAs have grown 3 times the national average. And to sustain for 30 years at 3 times the national average is not an aberration. That's the world changing, okay? If you compare them to a comparable dozen MSAs from, say, New York to DC to Chicago, Northeast, Midwest, which a lot of institutional people would consider a playing field, it's 5 times. So, Raleigh and Nashville and all that versus, DC and Philly and Chicago, 5 times the growth rate are sustained for 30 years. So the point is, this has been going on for a very long time. And there's all sorts of reasons, which we can get into. And then, of course, what happened last year, right? And COVID has really just accelerated and amplified what's already been going on. Now, that's not to suggest that what we've experienced in the last year is going to sustain, right? It's kind of like something was happening and COVID gave it a little bit of an additional shot of adrenaline, And it's not to suggest at all that places like New York and DC and Chicago aren't going to be very important commercial and cultural centers for a very long time. They are. But as far as growth, which was really what your question was, the demographic trends in the U.S. for a very long time have been pointing, from Northeast, Midwest to kind of Southeast, Southwest. What's piled on with COVID is, we're seeing a flow from California to Texas, as an example. And there's a headline every week, whether it's Elon Musk or HP or Oracle or something. Will that continue forever? I'm not sure. I don't think LA and San Francisco are going away by any means. But that's what we're seeing right now. So as far as its population and jobs and household formation, historic and projected, the demographic story is very, very strong. And you mentioned blue and red, and we won't go off on politics. But what I think is going to perhaps further exacerbate this, in at least the short to intermediate term, is some of the states in Northeast, Midwest have some serious fiscal sort of situations, right? And they have tax policies and that induce people to come down here. There was a term, I'm not saying it's fair or right or nice, but that we have a lot of inflow every year. And here in Boca, and a lot of New Yorkers call themselves de Blasio refugees. It's just people escaping tax regimes and stuff. And the problem is that snowballs, right? And so, there'll be not to say I'm a native New Yorker, New York's not going anywhere. But as an example, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, there's some things to figure out in the intermediate term from a fiscal perspective and tax policy and, unfunded obligations going forward and things like that. So there are certain things that I think bode well for the demographic story around the Sun Belt.
Thanks, Scott. And at some point, I want you to mention the cities, but I want to jump over to Ben. But the cities that you are most interested in the Southeast. Ben, you're the biggest investor on this panel and maybe anywhere. There's probably only one other. in the sphere. What's your view on the Southwest and the Southeast and Brookfield's view?
Yeah, so I'd strongly agree with all the points that Scott's made. And excuse me, we've watched this. I would say, I'm actually a native Floridian, so I watched this change over the last 30 plus years. And this is, when we say short-term or long-term, this is long-term, but this has been going on for decades. And I think it's relevant today, and it steals a lot of the headlines because you had a confluence of this trend that was already perpetuating some political factors that, and mainly tax-driven, that have pushed businesses and individuals to a certain place. And the financial and social mobility that people have while we're in the current state we're in sort of our COVID environment. So I think I think it's the same story. I don't think the story's really changed. I think, to Scott's point, it's probably gotten a little bit of rocket fuel with what's going on globally, domestically, politically, and also from a healthcare perspective. I don't think that means, which a lot of the headlines would suggest, that San Francisco and New York are emptying out for the beaches of Palm Beach and Miami and Austin, Texas. But I do think those markets have been meaningful beneficiaries of a lot of those push factors. And so that's happening. We've been watching it. We've been investing on that basis. So I think it's here to stay. I think it's a generational change as well. I think it's no longer just your grandparents living in South Florida. There's millennials, there's new household formation and the like, and now there's there's professional opportunity in some of these markets that hadn't been there in the past. So if you were just going to have a high-paying white-collar job, it was not 3 cities in the country that you were going to be able to have that opportunity. I think that distributed opportunity set and workforce is true, and it's in a lot of these places that we keep talking about. So I think it's here. I think Scott made a lot of the points and very intelligently, and I think our view would be much aligned with a lot of those themes.
I think it's important to note for those of us that still have connection with New York that Brookfield has made some big investments in New York even recently, and continues to do so. Do you see yourself continuing to invest in New York?
Yeah, we do. Look, I think for all those reasons, I think we actually see an opportunity in places like New York and San Francisco, for the reason that the sentiment, even pre-COVID, in a lot of these cities was starting to get a bit negative for a lot of obvious and warranted reasons. I think the sentiment now is probably swung a little too far in our view. And while we haven't quite seen the mountain of opportunities, because I don't think pricing has gotten to a point where we think the nature of the fundamentals equals where sort of people are transacting, for bits and pieces, we're finding some of those opportunities. So, I think this week there was an announcement we're buying something from SL Green in New York. We are under contract on something in the Bay Area in San Francisco. So I think what we're seeing is spots of opportunities, which are this dislocation of probably what we believe is an overblown negative sentiment to these markets, and then a really, really favorable financing environment, which is not picking the markets and saying, we're going to price New York or San Francisco or some of these sort of negative bias markets differently. And so we're taking advantage of that. So we're seeing a little bit of cap rate expansion on the buy side and real compression on our financing rates. And we think that's a window of opportunity that we'll see that people will wake up to quickly, and start to, the market will normalize a bit.
Makes sense. Steve, sitting in Florida, like Scott, like I'm sitting in Florida. Where are you right now? Oh, we have to unmute you, Steve.
Yeah, today I'm in Winter Park outside of Orlando, but I'll be back in Palm Beach this weekend.
Well, Steve, you're fortunate that you're in the hot asset class today with industrial, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that, not just the move to the Southeast, and you certainly can comment on that in the Southwest, but industrial markets have been booming, exploding, and maybe share a little bit of the COVID impact on the industrial markets as well.
No one would ever think that COVID would be good in it for anything, but I will tell you this, Simon, it's certainly been fantastic for e-com, for distribution, and for the industrial category, all in all. I mean, you look back, I mean, just look at the dynamic changes that have happened. You know, if we're looking back at like June, okay, or May of this past year, you know, where were we on debt financing, right? There was hardly any debt financing. All the banks were scared. Today it's super aggressive. I mean, it's just, it's a very dynamic time, I think, in the industrial business, and frankly, in all of our businesses. You know, industrial today, you would have thought it would have been flat. You know, fourth quarter was roughly, construction was roughly 69 million square feet. You know, the absorption for this past year was roughly 264 million square feet. It's pretty unbelievable. It was up 10%. You know, construction was the same thing. Construction was up 11%. You know, the nation did roughly 223 million square feet. I mean, we'll build, our pipeline today is about, our corporate pipeline is about 1.2 billion at cost. And I have always been a spec developer for the last 30 years. And it has proven out, you know, to be strong. But we've seen, I think, you know, you guys were mentioning a minute ago, there's been a huge exodus from the Northeast. The Northeast traditionally has been running about 121 million people, growing at about 3% a year. The Southeast is about 92 million, growing at about 11%, expected to grow about 11% over the next 10 years. And I did mean before 3% growth in the Northeast over 10 years. But it just shows how these southern markets have caught fire and what's driving all of that. I think, you know, you guys are sitting probably somewhere between Palm Beach and Miami, and you know that during this time, housing prices are off the charts. We are selling 2 houses right now, one that will close tomorrow. You know, and they're just, you know, the pricing is pretty unbelievable. But again, so is the construction cost, and you know, it's an interesting time. But moreover, some of the things that are driving it, you know, Amazon is on fire. Any of us that are building, steel pricing has doubled, lumber has doubled. You know, it is super expensive to build right now. But my sense is you just kind of keep moving. Pricing, land pricing, we thought last year land pricing would be stable or go down. Land's at an all-time high, and there's still a huge land rush that's going on. You know, it's look at all the packages that come to all of our houses every day. You know, my sense is, you know, I think that we will look back some years from now, and we'll see this as, you know, this giant change in how the American public and perhaps the world public does business. But, you know, look at all of the packages that come. People are ordering online. Will that change? I don't think that's going back. Right now, they say that the demand for warehousing right now will be about 200 million square feet, and that doesn't even include the safety stock that most companies are looking at because they were caught so short during the downturn, you know, during the opening of the pandemic.
Thanks, Steve. And cap rates on multi seem to only have tightened since the pandemic started. Fair to say?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I think cap rates for all of us are down.
Yeah, for yours too, Scott, multi.
Yeah, look, it's important to segregate by geography, and I live and breathe the Sun Belt, and it's I can't really speak to cap rates as much. Say New York and San Fran they're dealing with a little bit different dynamics. They certainly haven't gapped out tremendously. We know that, but in the Sun Belt, you know, it was interesting. I would say from March to July or so, the single, you know, I got 2 questions from my investors every day. Excuse me, how's the portfolio doing? And, you know, when is it going to be time to kind of get going? When's there going to be blood in the streets? When we're going to back up the truck and wave in a bunch of generationally cheap assets? And I tried to caution everybody. And of course, that's not what happened, right? And so if you look at it from a fundamentals perspective, I think everyone in my sector and my geography was a little pleasantly surprised about how we came through COVID as it relates to collections We never went lower than about 96 cents. And of course, there was some artificial stimulus, but nevertheless, if you told me in March or February, we're about to lose 40 million or whatever it was jobs, would collections go below 96? I would have certainly bet the answer is yes. That's not what happened. And similarly, face rates, occupancy, and all that more or less held. So we have that. And then at the same time, well, at least until recently, the Treasury was well below 1. And at the same time, we have a lot of capital kind of having a look and saying, wow, apartments seem to have held up pretty well. So we have capital flow, we have a low Treasury, and we have, a recent, pretty strong track record around fundamentals. Anyway, there's no way you bring all that together and say all of a sudden we're going to buy a bunch of cheap assets. And in fact, it's gone the other way. It's absolutely not the case that a property that would have traded for $100 in Jan of 20 is worth 90 or $95 in Jan of 21. Again, I'm talking kind of mid-size and greater market, Sunbelt. And if anything, it's up. Cap rates are down. Pretty much, if we're talking, Class A, Dallas, Atlanta, that's a 4-cap world. And for most of our careers, we talked about knowing each other 30 years. For 27 of those 30 years, I never would have thought I would have said that. But that's absolutely, kind of where things are. And I think the capital flow is coming more and more. So, I don't think it's going the other way. We grew up in a world of, 7 and 8% cap rates, and I'm not sure we're seeing that again in our careers,
Yeah, we've had many conversations with where the opportunities are going to be and how deep the discounts will be. And I think that in the worst cases, in some asset classes, maybe they'll be 5 or 10%. But there's so much capital out there protecting those values, and sellers aren't recognizing losses beyond that, is what we're seeing. Hey Ben, let me switch asset classes for a second to the alternatives, which Brookfield's in every asset class. Maybe you can share the views of some of those asset classes and either your interest in them or overall what you're seeing in the market.
Yeah, sure. So I would tell you, and this is probably a global generalization, but we cannot have a discussion with one of our LPs, whether that be a large pension, a sovereign wealth fund, just large institution, that they don't ask about two things. The first is life sciences, and the second is logistics. Logistics has been a constant theme over the past couple of years for all the obvious reasons that Steve stated prior. Life sciences, I'd say over the past, I'd like to say 12 months, but it's probably really the past 18 to 24 months has gone from what I would think we would all consider truly in the bucket of alternatives to mainstream, probably the most desirable asset class for most of the capital. The problem is the whole US market's only about 150 million square feet, and half of that's in 3 different markets. And so people's ability to invest in that sector are very, very difficult. And therefore we've seen obviously a backdrop of fundamentals that have been very good. Steve said COVID's been good for logistics. Well, COVID's been really good for life sciences. If you think about all of the capital that was flowing into the sector from venture capital and from NIH funding prior to the pandemic, clearly that's accelerated. And so the demand side has got a huge, huge tailwind, and the supply side, in terms of where these companies want to be, very, very hard to build new supply. We could go, in the middle of a field in New Jersey and build a life science building, but that doesn't mean that we're going to attract anyone that wants to be there, that has a requirement. And so we've seen that sector probably be the most topical sector in terms of what capital seeking today. And I would tell you, we're in the process, and this is a public thing, so there's no industry trade here, but we're in the process of selling our life science platform. It's about a $3.5 billion deal. We're selling that to one of Blackstone's funds. And I would tell you, for a $3.5 billion deal across 3 markets on the East Coast for life sciences, we had probably 10 true qualified buyers, which 2 years ago, you probably would have had 2, and it would have been the public companies that are specifically in that space. And so I think that sector has changed dramatically. But I think alternatives generally, for a lot of the sort of fundamentals around demographic changes, have been much more mainstream in terms of what we're hearing from our investors. And then the obvious counter to that is, the sort of traditional mainstream sectors are out of favor. We talked a bit about, sort of the trade away from cities. but I'd say clearly office, and the questions around the future of office and occupation and how people utilize workspace has probably dampened the enthusiasm around that sector. And then obviously retail has been for quite some time and probably accelerated now over the past 12 months. And then, the interesting thing I would say in terms of, sector and portfolio makeup, COVID has obviously had a massive impact on hospitality, right? What we hadn't seen and what we thought we would see was truly phenomenal distress opportunities in the hospitality sector, those opportunities of scale and of real quality. And they haven't really presented themselves. What we've seen is the things that were probably broken even pre-COVID. There's distress there, but the real high quality stuff as it comes to hospitality, the capital markets and the financing markets, I think have buoyed that and will probably bridge a lot of those things, sort of back to normalcy. And we see in a lot of markets who are sort of multi-dimensional, places like, South Florida, for example, where you have a reliance on tourism as well as business travel and so forth. I think a lot of that sort of hospitality product will actually will probably survive and thrive when we come out of this from pent-up demand. So I'd say a long way of saying in summary, the alternatives don't feel like alternatives now when we're talking to capital sources, and maybe some of the old mainstream sectors, which we have a lot of exposure to, we still see opportunity there, are pretty meaningfully out of favor.
When we talk about the out of favor retail, we talk about out of favor office and hospitality, I have to tell you, there's so much interest in hospitality right now because the view is it's coming back, and a good hotel will still be a good hotel again. There's a little more question around office, and of course there'll be great office, we know that, but there'll be some office that it's unclear how it will fare. And the same thing with retail. Retail is not dead. There's still a lot of great retail out there, and but there's also a ton of it that we don't know how it will come out. But I think for the most part, investors, I've seen more investor interest in hospitality by far of the three classes lately. We've done 2 rescue capital deals, and one of our clients is buying 5 hotels right now, which the financing has come in tighter than, quite frankly, we expected it to come in when we started.
Hey, Simon, what's the what kind of spreads are you seeing in hotels? I mean, you comment on that. That's interesting.
I think it's coming. We're now seeing hotel deals in the L5s where we weren't before, and that's the big change. And we did a retail deal at L6 with 78% of the tenants not paying rent on a very large center. So anything in that 5 to 6 range is actually pretty good for an asset today that's suffering badly. That was probably 8 or 9 not that long ago.
Thanks.
Sure. I want to talk about some of the demographic trends we're seeing, and maybe we can start with how it affects multi, but I guess we could work our way to office, and I don't know how much the trends of young people are affecting industrial today, Steve, but we'll still let you throw your hat in that conversation. Scott, we're seeing a lot of micro units. We're financing some. We did a project in Nashville. We're financing a few others now, and that's a change in the last few years. Certainly one change. What are some of the trends you're seeing? How young people are impacting the real estate that you own? And I'm going to leave that for all of you. I think Ben, maybe on office, it might be germane too. Scott?
Well, I guess there's a variety of things to talk about, and also it depends on which kind of subcategory of young people. So for instance, there's a record number of 20-somethings living at home. I think there's a view that will normalize, and so that's going to represent apartment demand.
I'm referring to young people like me, Scott, if you don't mind, if you want to address those people first. I'm just kidding.
I think we're close to the same age, and it's been a while since someone's called me a young person, so I'll leave it there, buddy. But then let's talk a little older, like millennials, okay? The millennials are entering kind of the I used to say home buying, I'll call it home living, and I'll explain stage of life. So we're seeing some demographic push, right? Housing's obviously going on a tear, and a part of it is kind of just a demographics and millennials entering, that stage life, married, kids, move to the burbs. I think more will choose to rent in a house in the burbs than historically, which introduces some other thoughts around construction of ground up single family for rent. That's part of what's driving things there. So we're seeing that impact on housing in conjunction with interest rates, and there was some supply chain disruption. So housing's kind of crazy right now. There's a derivative impact on my business because I think the dreaded word for guys who are in the business of building 2 and 3 story stick built, meaning wood construction, is lumber. Lumber is causing every developer to have a heck of a headache right now, and it's pretty tough to be on the verge of closing and just about done working things out with your contractor, and to get a call that on a $50 million deal, oops, lumber's $4 million higher than we thought. So I have a lot of that going on, which is derivative of the demand driving housing and all that kind of stuff. That'll normalize though eventually, but that's really what it is. We're seeing the suburban movement of the millennials. But and also amplified, by COVID in the short run, and people just generally wanting to get to the burbs. That's not a structural change. But in the the younger group, the 20-somethings, there's no way we're going to sustain at this level. And I forget the percentage off the top of my head, but it's meaningfully higher than long-term average as far as 20-somethings living at home. Because think about coming out of college last year, right? It might have been the worst year ever to come out of college and try and find a job, and so that has to normalize over time. So there's kind of cross currents,
Ben, any comments at all on the topic of young trends and on real estate?
Yeah, so I'll mention a couple of things. So we have two businesses that I think are relevant to some of these comments. We actually have a single family home building business that buys lots, entitles lots, and sells those lots, or in a lot of cases builds those homes. It's always been a phenomenal business for us. This has been the best year that business has ever had. I think I read in one of our reports, the industry delivered something like 800,000, new single family homes in 2020. It was up by 20%. And I think a lot of that's contributed by the fact that we have, sub 3% mortgage environment. So the home buying cohort has grown a lot. I remember, sort of 7 to 9 years ago, we were all talking about this massive cohort of people that was just pushed out of the home buying pool, and they would be pushed out of the home buying pool until they were in their 40s. Whatever the math was telling us at that point in time, I think a lot of those people have just now entered back into being potential home buyers. The other thing I would say is we also have a single family rental business, and we've seen that business, to Scott's earlier point, also seen a ton of growth and a ton of demand. And I do think it is a demographic shift, maybe more of a behavioral shift, that more people are just thinking about, I'm going to rent a single family house, as opposed to the only way I live in a single family house is be a purchaser of that. And I think that's more of a behavioral trend that'll stay. So I think time will tell what that means for multifamily demand. But I think at the end of the day, in most of these investable markets, multifamily occupancy, we anticipate to still stay strong, and the demographics will support that, and the high quality stuff will stay really attractive. As I bring it back to office, which is our largest sector, I think it's TBD. I think the way that I would frame office today, when we think about what's the future of office, it's like when we think about most sectors, when there's disruption, at least recently over the last decade, a lot of the disruption has been around technology, right? And we can talk about COVID being, okay, this is a health crisis and this has changed people's behaviors. But at the end of the day, what I really think it's resulted in is technology has now disrupted office. What we are doing now, this is technology disrupting. I'm in the office, but I'm talking to you guys on a Zoom. And I think that will dictate some of the trends that we'll see in that sector going forward. We already had meaningful change in terms of a lot of the behaviors we were seeing in terms of how people were, we went from massive densification over the last 10 years to we actually started to see people space planning, and they wanted more, more sort of collaboration space, but more private spaces because they needed focus spaces. We started to see that trend. That trend was happening because the generational population of the workforce was changing, right? So millennials were starting to be the sort of middle to senior management of these businesses and changing those things. For the next 10 years, that's going to change because the next generation will start to be into those positions. But what we will have to adapt to is now we have a workforce that's highly trained in technology and highly trained in the ability to work from other places. And so, when you think about those demographics and how that changes that sector, I think you made the point earlier, there's still going to be great office buildings, but I think what technology is going to do and the disruption in office will create sort of the haves and the have-nots. And so there's going to be a lot of assets. We were probably already oversupplied in office in most major markets. So there'll be a lot of assets that probably suffer disproportionately, and other ones that, that sort of are on the other end of the spectrum, and people will continue to pay for quality and modern infrastructure and technology and the right location. But there'll be a swath of the market where there's some real pain. And I think that's all tied back to these changing demographic trends of the workforce, coupled with an acceleration of technology disrupting the sector.
Yeah, clearly Zoom and our ability to do this and then do this with clients and partners has changed, I think, forever. And I can tell you that it was a big part of our firm's success in 2020 and 2021 already, is using this tool in the most effective way possible. And I just, one other comment, you mentioned SFR and BTR. That was a part of our business we founded in 2014. It was zero part of our business, and last year was into the 20s as a percentage. So, and again, using Zoom as an example, our business when I started 25 years ago was 90% in New York, and last year was 90% outside of New York. And I know that Zoom affected in those numbers on just a few major assignments that we won during with Zoom and executed with the help of Zoom. So there's clearly a technology affecting our business and probably a lot of other businesses. Good segue though, technology is to Steve. There's a technology I guess we'll call Amazon that's had the biggest impact on industrial, at least every industrial Zoom session I've done. It's the topic. So tell us how it's affected your businose.
So let me weigh in on your previous question. So, those many may not think that there was such an impact, but look at our kids today, right? Everything's technology. All they're ordering. We were the guys that would go check out a TV and then maybe order it online or something like that. They're not even going to check it out. They're just ordering it. So that is really driving a huge impact for industrial space. Definitely. But I interrupted your question. So.
All good. Continue on the technology part of industrial, because clearly Amazon has the biggest impact in the industrial sector over the past year. The numbers I hear in virtually every market in terms of their total leasing relative to the overall leasing is not insignificant. It's very significant. So, from your perspective, what happens to industrial when Amazon slows down? I'd like to get your take on that and sort of its long-term impact on retail, even if you have a view.
So look at it this way, back to an earlier question. The big thing that happens is steel prices and lumber prices go down, right? If Amazon slows. I had reached out to a friend while we were on this. We were in a construction meeting the other day, and they had a number of the amount of steel that Amazon has booked, and that's what's doubled all the steel pricing. It's just phenomenal. I don't have the number at top of mind, but just incredibly interesting. So we're bidding on 2 of those deals now. I'll share just a super quick case study. We're building a 4-building development of roughly smaller bay type product. And when I say smaller bay, I mean like 180 depth, 32 clear type buildings. So what we're finding, and Amazon has come in when we're ready to continue with our second phase, Amazon's come in and said, we'd like the other half of the site. So the dilemma is, one, you're going to be in on a building that you generally build for about $65 a foot, right? And lease on a multi-tenant basis, they're like $165 a foot. And they want to modify the configuration, take two buildings, make it one building, modify the configuration, still do a long-term lease, like a 15-year lease. And you think, well, maybe you ought to do a 20-year lease, because what are you going to do with the building after you're finished? Because that building is a grade level kind of building. So the dynamics are super interesting right now when you look at this, and when you run it out the rents. Interestingly enough, the Amazon deal gives you great compression in your cap rates. So that deal might go off at somewhere, on a Florida number or South Florida number, somewhere around it could be as low as maybe 215, but certainly probably a 415 cap, but certainly a 425, 430 cap, okay, all day. And while you may build the traditional product, that's going to go off today at like probably a 495 cap in a market like that. It's interesting how you weigh it and which way you go. If you're going to sell quick, maybe you do that, maybe you take that. But otherwise, you put yourself in the hands of Amazon. And do you really want to be there? By and large, we're on the average building roughly, I would say, 5 to 7 million square feet a year of spec space in the Southeast, between Charlotte and Savannah and Atlanta and Greenville and the I-4 corridor in Florida and the 3 counties in the Southeast. We've done business this way for 30 years, but you wonder if you buy into the whole Amazon piece or if you still stay traditional. And I'll merge with that. You look at all the big boxes. It doesn't matter if you're in Dallas, if you're on the West Coast, if you're in the Northeast or North Jersey, or up around Bethlehem and that whole area, State Road 80, in Allentown. All you see is these big boxes. But I'll share with you that the interesting thing is that you've got big boxes represent about 50% of new product today, and and by and large about 30% of the U.S. stock. I think the real opportunity that we're seeing, certainly out of COVID, is that over the past 2-3 years, if you look at the metrics, buildings that are 250,000 square feet or smaller represent about 70% of the U.S. stock. However, it's only about 15% of new builds. That's where I think I believe that area, the smaller user, is the money shot. And when I say smaller user, by and large, the U.S. is roughly 15 to 50,000 square feet as a standard warehouse user. I know we like to talk about, we only talk about our big deals, right? But that's where the meat of the market is. That's not being fed. That's the money shot in the business. That's where the margin is, and that's where the pricing is.
And so, Steve, I don't know how many square feet over the last 12 or the next 12 months that you have on the plate, but how much of that was Amazon or will be Amazon?
Zero.
And how much of it will be the zero Amazon?
Zero Amazon. I don't chase it. We try to work on I try to work on a spread that's somewhere around 150, 175, 2 on a good day. Why do I want to work on 50 cent spread deals? You've got to work 3 times as hard to make the same thing. That's just not where I live. It is a great place. It is the sexy place, but I'm my own guy. And if they come and they want our site and we can help them, terrific. It's great business, and we'd love to do. We're bidding 2 of them now, but notwithstanding there is this giant, as I said way early in the conversation, this giant flow. I mean, you got to look at it this way, Simon. You know, we do everything by heat maps, and we're driving where the puck's going to be. You know, we're looking at where population is strengthening and what the trends are. So if you believe that, I mean, just in a specific corridor, let's just say from Atlanta up through Columbia to Charlotte and over to Raleigh, if you look at that area of the market, that's expected to grow 4 million people of inbound alone over the next 10 years. If it's true that every person, whether it's a baby, the elderly, or any of us, consume about 50 square feet a year of consumables. It could be baby beds, it could be strollers, it could be walkers, it could be, it could be cars, for, and new homes for those at different ages. But if that's the case, just in that corridor, not including organic, but inbound only, you'll expect roughly 200 million square feet of new industrial to happen in that corridor. Take that and look at California and look at Dallas and look at the I-4 corridor in Florida. That's not going to happen in Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami, because you can drive from Jupiter basically through West Palm all the way to Miami and not see one empty piece of land. But it's a great time. It's a dynamic time, and I think some of this, because buying behaviors has changed so incredibly, that we'll look back on this, and the computer has changed our lives, our handhelds have changed our lives, and how we buy and how we do business, I think, is forever different. No different than the coming of electricity or the coming of the telephone. It'll be a dynamic change.
Thanks, Steve. Hey, Lou, I was just going to ask you to put your video on, and you did.
Well, I was just out of Chick-fil-A.
Don't make me jealous.
Listen,
Steve says 50. Steve says 50 square feet. What do you say? How many square feet per person?
About 50 square feet of consumables annually.
I'm down to buying nothing material anymore. I don't know if anybody else is on that trend. Maybe.
What else could you buy now?
Protein shakes. That's about the only thing. Maybe swap out the underwear every 6 months. Other than that, there's nothing left to buy, Lou.
What Steve mentions, I've been in meetings with Steve on some lender presentations going back a few years ago, and I've heard those kind of statistics, and it's really amazing. The one thing we haven't talked specifically about, and I'm curious as to what this panel thinks, is that we know there's always going to be retail, and when you see a good retail property, you know what it is, but sometimes it's hard to describe. But regional malls, like what is any kind of future? I know they really can't be regional malls anymore. I would be curious as Ben, like what is there anybody buying those up, raising them off the site? I mean, they're great sites, great infrastructure, utilities, sewers. What do you think of that?
Come on, Lou. I thought you said this was going to be easy. You're going to throw the mall question at me. Now, fair enough. So look, you're right. The case is the U.S. was already over retailed, and so a lot of these shopping centers, and to your point, sort of coin them regional malls, didn't need to be in existence to begin with, and then you had a massive secular shift in sort of retail consumption and buying behavior. So I think it's doubled down that force across the obsolescence of some of these retail centers. However, in a lot of these places, it's true. I'm guilty of it now. I'm an urban person, but I come home every night and there's 12 Amazon packages at my door, and I'm not running to Roosevelt Field Mall on the weekend, but I'm not the typical U.S. consumer either. A lot of these places, the regional shopping mall is still the center of sort of entertainment and social activity across many of the markets in the US. And so what I would tell you is a lot of the malls that should still exist will need to be redeveloped with probably a bunch of different mixes of uses. Some of that is probably, multifamily housing. Some of that's probably different types of retail, more food and beverage focused, experiential, all the things you've probably heard people that own shopping malls say for the last couple of years, but I do think it's true. But I think it's true underpinned by the fact that a lot of the malls shouldn't be malls anymore, and there's probably higher and better use for a lot of that space. So I think you'll see just a shrinking of supply, and Gap doesn't need to have 300 stores in a certain MSA to get a certain component of wallet share with the rise of e-commerce, but they will need the really important high value stores. And I think you'll see that. And I think you'll see, the sort of the winners and then a lot of the losers. And the winners will be the fortress malls that have been fortress malls for, the last decade or 2 decades.
Hey, Lou, I've been financing malls my whole career. And I would say 80% of the time someone calls us up and talks about financing a mall today, it falls into the land loan bucket more than a mall bucket.
That makes a lot of sense.
Come on, Lou, give us some more questions. You're on.
So I do have some questions, but I don't want to, Simon, you're doing such a good job. This has been one of the best panels I've ever heard. I'll come in and ruin it in about 5 minutes. And then these guys will never talk to me anymore. And Ben, I didn't know up until this, and I'll never get to talk to Ben, but.
Not after the mall question.
Not after the mall question. The one thing that we kind of, like, I look at some of the current events, like particularly what's going on in Texas right now with the with this winter kind of frigid lock, and there's an energy issue there, and I guess there's definitely a great divide in the country, and I'm talking about this. People have different ideas. Doesn't mean their ideas are bad or good, and we're kind of at an inflection point where energy, right, could Texas be permanently hurt, or at least for the next 5 years, in terms of people thinking, hey, if it gets cold again, and you don't really have an energy grid that could handle something like this. I'm just wondering, there's so many things out of control of business, out of control of fundamental qualitative and quantitative analysis, that's really perpetuated by the government, what their policies are. And I'd be curious, what is government's role going forward? We have some serious issues. It's ironic, as we're sitting on this call, and I think in about an hour, this Mars Endeavour is going to land on Mars, and NASA put together this technology to land something the size of a school bus that it slows down from 18,000 miles down to 2 miles an hour, and all through technology. And technology seems to have been like a kind of common theme here. But what we haven't really talked about is, what is the government's role in some of this stuff? Because there is a lot of things that need to be fixed, I think. I'd be curious.
Lou, I think this is where I take back the moderator role.
All right,
okay, do you guys want to take that or my next question? Who wants Lou's question? Who wants my next question?
Well, Lou's question covers climate change, the role of government on Earth and Mars. The shopping center question. I'm
3 minutes, Lou.
I was seriously thinking about not reappearing on this thing. Question of wisdom come about.
All right, wait, Lou, I got to close.
I say Simon takes over as moderator again.
I have a closer. And Lou, I want you to answer each of these last few questions, okay?
Wait, Simon, that was Scott's question he sent me.
Okay. So,
Simon,
Lou,
can you mute him?
Lou, you get to answer each of these questions really quickly, because we are almost out of time, because I have a 1:30 Zoom. So, and so does everybody else. With the future of office, we've all had so many debates, even if we're not in office, about the future of office. So 20 seconds, Scott, you go first.
Look, I think long-term big picture office is still a fine bet. And if you're able to invest on that basis, picking your spots, it could be a terrific strategy. Where I would be scared if your investment horizon and your capital were such that you had to bet rents were going to be X in 3 years and do or die, that would be a little scary. But long-term big picture is probably an opportunity.
Steve?
I would say the same thing. I think that's the big opportunity. I can't really add a lot more to that. That would have been my answer as well.
Lou?
I'll keep it simple. I think there has to be some percentage of change of use in office inventory. Otherwise, the occupancy rates are going to be kind of misinterpreted.
So multifamily, some conversion to multi?
maybe schools, maybe jails, maybe parking
Life
lots.
science. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with everyone. I think the one thing I would say in terms of my thoughts on future of office, I think the office will change now in terms of how we think about it. It's not your robotic, I go Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, because that's what my job tells me to do. It's I go to this place to do something of purpose. There's a lot of other things I can do outside of an office. So I think the office is still important. I think it becomes more important because it's going to be purposeful activities done there. And therefore, the place that people choose to office will be much more important than it was in the past.
And my view of the walking meeting, which I invented 20 years ago. Forget that. Okay, last thing, the future of New York City. Anybody have a 20 seconds? Future, Steve, you're not in New York City, but what do you think?
How does it not come back? You know, it's the Big Apple. Definitely will come back. No doubt about it.
Ben?
Yeah, people have been urbanizing for the last 200 years. It's the global city. The world revolves around New York, and we know that as a global business. So I think it'll always take its lumps, but it's resilient.
Scott, you already said it. Same.
Yeah, I'm a long-term bull. Look, I remember in the 70s when I was a little kid, a famous Daily News headline, Ford to New York, dropped dead, and there was all this trouble. And the 80s were awesome. And then I remember after September 11, and there was a lot of fear, people going to want to travel here, tourism, business. And the 2000s, New York went on a tear. People have been urbanizing for commercial and cultural reasons even longer, right? Thousands of years. And I would not bet against New York. It's going through a tough time. Again, I don't know how you underwrite office rents in the next 24 months. The long-term big picture, no, I wouldn't bet against New York.
Yeah.
To
And
be
before I ask,
change, regime change, if you will, you know, I think it's shooting itself in the foot a bit. You know, we chased away HQ2, HQ2 and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that was a tragedy.
Lou?
Comes back, it always does, and it'll come back always sooner than anybody would have thought so.
You know, I'm in Miami now, and I'm here for a few months, and it's been fantastic, a good work environment, and during COVID for sure. But and I live in Westchester, but I'm moving to New York City for at least 3 days a week or 4 days a week in the next year to 2 years, and I can't wait. So I mean, that's a data point, and I could live anywhere I want to live, but I can't wait to get back into the city when I think things will be better post COVID than they are today, and eat at the restaurants and go to the live music and all those things. Because even in Miami, which is an incredible city, it doesn't compare at all to the nightlife and the music and Broadway and all of the things that New York offers.
Amen.
So, yeah. Hey, Lou, I'm out of questions.
Listen, you did a great job. I just want to thank everyone for really participating. It means a lot to Fordham, and it's kind of a good just closing segue. Fordham's primary campus is in the Bronx, New York. We have a nice campus in Lincoln Center, Westchester County, and I think that one of the things that will be different in this recovery is that, and one of Fordham's goal is to outreach to the surrounding communities, like through our Scholarship 250 and through our education, to get more people involved in coming into this industry. Because I think some of the great visionaries that are young right now, they're a very valued commodity. They're undervalued, and we need to seek them out. And I think if everyone would embark on making sure that those surrounding communities have a say and can get a hand in or a hand up into this business, it'll be good for all of us. But thank you so very much. I really, this panel was just fantastic, and I really do appreciate it. Fordham, thanks you. Thank you very much.
Lou, you make a huge contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Lou.
Nice job, Simon. Thank you.
Yeah, good job, Simon. Take care, guys.